I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day.
I have a dream that one day. Those words shook the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. They rose through the clouds of Washington, and they echoed across generations, not just as poetry, but as prophecy, a call not for silence, but for change. A dream not only dreamed, but lived, fought for, and carried forward by a man whose footsteps left a permanent imprint on the soul of a nation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in 1963, but they did not mark the end of his journey. They were the beginning of a deeper struggle, because dreams are powerful, but they are also dangerous to the comfortable. And King's dream was not just about harmony, it was about justice. It was not just about hope, it was about hard truth. He dreamed of children judged not by their skin, but by their character. And then went to cities where children were denied schools, playgrounds, even sidewalks. He dreamed of freedom ringing from every village and hill, and then marched through towns where freedom was still under lock and key. Martin Luther King Jr. was more than a speaker. He was a strategist, a theologian, a father, and a revolutionary. One who never raised a fist, but shook an empire with his voice. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1929, the son of a Baptist preacher. He grew up in the segregated South, where laws were written not to protect people, but to divide them. Even as a boy, King could feel that the world was not as it should be, and when he found his voice, he used it not to shout, but to lift, not to divide, but to unify. He earned a doctorate in theology, inspired by the writings of Gandhi and the teachings of Jesus. He believed that nonviolence was not passive. It was action fueled by restraint, strength disguised as stillness, and power guided by moral clarity. In 1955, at just 26 years old, he led the Montgomery bus boycott after Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat. The boycott lasted over a year, 381 days of walking, sacrifice, and resistance, and ended in victory. But that was only the beginning. King went on to co-found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, traveling the country to organize peaceful protests, voter registration drives, and civil disobedience campaigns. He was arrested more than 20 times. His home was bombed. He received constant death threats, but never once did he respond with violence. Instead, he responded with words. Powerful, measured, unforgettable words. By 1963, the movement had reached its boiling point, and on August 28th, King stood before a crowd of 250,000 in Washington, D.C., and delivered the speech that would define a generation. But in the years that followed, his dream was tested by harsh reality. In 1965, he led the march from Selma to Montgomery, a journey marked by violence, bloodshed, and courage. The images of peaceful protesters beaten on Edmund Pettus Bridge shocked the world and moved President Lyndon B. Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was one of King's greatest legislative victories, and the ballot box, once blocked by fear, intimidation, and racism, was now open to millions more. Yet King understood something deeper, that racism wasn't just a Southern problem or a political issue. It was rooted in poverty, housing, education, war, and silence. And so in 1966, he turned his attention north to Chicago. He walked through slums. He lived in a rundown apartment. He marched for open housing and equal opportunity. And there, for the first time, he was met with not only resistance, but pure hatred. Crowds threw rocks, signs screamed hate, and yet he said the violence he saw in Chicago was worse than anything he'd witnessed in the South. Still, he pressed on, because Dr. King believed justice could not be regional. He believed that moral truth did not respect state lines. He saw injustice, whether in a cotton field or a city block, and called it what it was. He began speaking out against the Vietnam War, condemning it as a betrayal of American values and a deadly burden on the poor. His stand cost him dearly. He was criticized by the media, by political leaders, even by some civil rights allies. But King never fought for popularity. He fought for principle. In those final years, his voice grew quieter in the mainstream, but stronger in its moral depth. He warned of what he called the triple evils: racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. He planned the Poor People's Campaign, a movement to unite the poor across all races and demand economic justice for all. He was no longer just fighting for civil rights. He was fighting for human rights. And in that bold evolution, he showed the true scope of his dream. A dream that did not stop at voting booths or buses, but stretched to food lines, classrooms, job sites, and homes. A dream not just for equality, but for dignity. In 1968, just weeks before the Poor People's March, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. He was there not to give a grand speech, but to support sanitation workers on strike for fair wages and safe working conditions. Even in death, he was marching with the forgotten. Today, many remember him as a dreamer, and he was, but he was also a doer, a planner, a man who understood that peace without justice is simply quiet oppression, a man who refused to wait for a better time, who declared that the time is always right to do what is right. So when you hear those words, "I have a dream that one day," know that the dream was not just imagined. It was lived, it was fought for, and it is still unfinished. And now, as his voice fades into history, let us not only remember what he said, let us remember what he did and what we must continue to do. Martin Luther King Jr. was not born a global icon. He was a preacher's son from Atlanta, raised in the deep currents of faith, discipline, and hope. But as he watched a country divided by skin color and cruelty, something within him stirred, a calling not just to speak, but to act. By the time he turned 26, he was leading the Montgomery bus boycott, thrust into the national spotlight by Rosa Parks' quiet defiance. For over a year, Black citizens walked miles rather than ride segregated buses. And King, despite threats, arrests, and bombings, stood firm. That early victory wasn't just about buses. It was a signal to the world that peaceful protest could shake the foundations of injustice. As the 1960s unfolded, King's leadership only grew. He helped form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, giving voice and strategy to a movement that was ready to rise. He marched in Birmingham. He stood in Washington. He wrote from jail. And with every step, he preached a simple but radical idea: that nonviolence is not weakness, it is power under control. In 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, King spoke of a dream. Not a fantasy, but a vision rooted in the Constitution, in Scripture, and in the sacred dignity of every human life. "I have a dream," he said, and the world listened. Yet for all its poetry, King's dream was a challenge, a demand that America live up to its promise. By 1965, his fight turned to voting rights. In Selma, Alabama, peaceful marchers were met with brutality on Bloody Sunday. King answered with more marches, more voices, and more courage. The result was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most important civil rights victories in U.S. history. But Dr. King didn't stop there. He knew that racism wasn't just in laws. It was in poverty, housing, education, and war. In 1966, he launched the Chicago Freedom Movement, taking the battle to the North, where discrimination wore a subtler mask. He moved into a rundown apartment, marched through hostile crowds, and pushed for fair housing. The hatred he faced there shocked even him. "I have seen hatred in many places," he said, "but I have never seen it so hostile and so hateful as here in Chicago." Still, he pressed on, because he believed true justice required more than comfort. It required sacrifice. At the same time, he began to speak out against America's war in Vietnam, calling it a betrayal of the poor and a distraction from justice at home. It was a bold move, one that cost him political support, media favor, and even allies. But King didn't measure right and wrong by popularity. He measured it by conscience. The past is not forgotten. It lives again through these stories, these images, and these voices. Thank you for joining us in History Gets Alive. Until next time, keep remembering, keep reflecting, and don't forget to subscribe our channel.